So we have with us two speakers from the UK after the French experience. And I'm going to introduce Mr. Neil Smith. He has been working as business development manager for the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority for the last 8 months. And before that, he worked for Rolls-Royce as global head of business development and strategic programs. Neil will talk about the NDAs, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, local, social, and economic strategy. Thanks, Neil, for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And I think the first thing I need to say is that I only have a beginner license for Zoom, so someone else is driving my slides. So
okay, I'll do that. No problem.
Yeah, bear with me if it's a little bit bumpy as we hadn't rehearsed. But thank you for having me today, and I'm really excited to be here. My name is Neil Smith, business manager for economic development at the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, or the NDA. And really what I just want to talk a little bit about today is our approach to socioeconomics, and what we're looking to try to achieve through that. So if we go to the first slide. Thanks. The NDA is responsible for the safe, secure and efficient cleanup of the UK's 17 earliest nuclear sites. And as you can see from the map, these are in remote, rural and coastal locations and away from major cities. I think the first thing that we need to say, and sorry, excuse me, is say that the sites are all very different in terms of their size, scale, which provides unique socio-economic challenges at each site. If you take Sellafield, for example, it's a multifunctional nuclear site where the activities are related not only to decommissioning, but also reprocessing and storage. When we look at Dounreay, Winfrith, Harwell, they were research sites. And then compared to that, the Magnox sites that we are decommissioning the first generation of nuclear power generation stations, which, while quite significant locally, are quite small in comparison. Next slide, please. So why is this important, and why does it matter? Well, it sets the context for us in terms of the regeneration, as the scale is really so different for us at Sellafield compared to the other sites. I think it's important to note at this point that we use economic impact assessment studies to try to gauge the impact our work has on our sites and to support the work that we do from a socioeconomic perspective. So we estimate that Sellafield sustains around 44,000 jobs, primarily in Cumbria, with a significant impact on the local economy. We're talking 1.2 billion in terms of GVA, or gross value added. It's the overwhelming employer in the local authority area, supporting nearly 60% of all jobs, the local authority being Copeland. And that's also because certain sectors of the economy are really reliant on Sellafield, particularly sort of your higher end economic activity where you might have consultancy or IT services. They're really reliant. There's almost no other tier one employer in the local area. And I think that's just something really to bear in mind in terms of the sort of scale of the challenge there. The other sites also have significant challenges, particularly acutely in Dounreay and North Wales, because the sites were deliberately put in remote locations and there's few alternative sources of employment. One thing that the slide doesn't mention, but I think it's really important in terms of sort of context and where we are now sort of globally is COVID. And the impact that's going to have economically speaking. We've done some indicative analysis that highlights that the parts of the UK economy that are likely to be hardest hit by COVID are those that were generally already economically behind anyway, and that actually overlays with our sites. So it's just something to bear in mind. Next slide, please. So how do we consider our approach to socioeconomics? The legislation that created the NDA asks us to consider our socioeconomic impact on our local communities. And we look at this from a few different lenses, really. Firstly, what opportunities does decommissioning create and how can we maximize it? But also, what are some of the more negative impacts that decommissioning can create? And what's the level of dependency that exists for the local community on the site? And of course, this varies, but it's something that we do ask ourselves. An example of some of the negative impacts that decommissioning can bring can be seen in the fact that the work that we do is very highly skilled and quite well or very well paid. And it can create a bit of a insider-outsider problem. So if you're in, then you have access to secure employment, a good wage. But if you're out, then you have higher house prices, which are driven up by people that have the higher salaries, and fewer opportunities to enter the employment market. And what does this mean for us from a socioeconomic perspective? Well, it means that we need to challenge ourselves to think about inclusive regeneration and how we can sort of mitigate those problems. On the next slide, which we're already on, we think about outcomes. So what are the outcomes we want? I mean, and ultimately, we're trying to support strong, resilient, and sustainable local economies. And to do that, we do need to think about and highlight some of the positives that nuclear decommissioning can provide from a regeneration perspective. The work that we do has a relatively long lead time, particularly when you compare it to some other industries that may be looking at decommissioning, and a relatively stable pipeline of work. I mean, and the other thing that we need to know as well from a positive perspective is that the nature of the work in the nuclear sector is diverse. And that means we can offer diverse work across a range of the supply chain, skills, research and development. And that's positive both in terms of sort of longer term planning, but also if we're looking at diversifying local economies. Specifically, when we think about R&D, we're really focused on trying to solve future challenges. And that then provides opportunities to potentially either export that internationally or push it into adjacent markets. And I think as well, in terms of sort of the growing importance of sustainability and environmental cleanup, it's actually quite a positive story in terms of sort of future employment for younger people who feel very passionate about sustainability to get involved in more sustainable jobs and environmental cleanups. So we're also focused, as I said, on longer term diversification of local economies. And that's something that we do in partnership with local authorities and local communities. But it's also important to mention when we're thinking about outcomes that they're actually one of the key risks, and it's related to R&D, is that a technological breakthrough could potentially actually accelerate that decommissioning work, and that pipeline of work that looked solid, secure, and long-term may not be as long-term as we previously thought. So it's just something to be mindful of, and we're conscious of when we're thinking about some of the outcomes and what we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. Thank you. What levers do we have as the NDA for socioeconomic impact? Well, we have a grant program that's funded all in all at about £15 million per year. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in the later slides, but there's a couple of areas that I really want to focus on here. And the first is we have a huge opportunity to drive something called social value and the positive socioeconomic impact actually through the rest of the work that we do as an organization. So in particular, and a real focus area for us at the moment is procurement, because the UK government have just introduced a public procurement notice, PPN 0620 to give it its full name. But that outlines that going forward, there's an expectation of a minimum of 10% weighting to be given to social value in public sector tender awards. So to give you the comparison, our grant program is £15 million a year. We spend as an organisation £1.9 billion a year through our supply chain. So obviously for us, this is a huge opportunity to really drive transformational outcomes, and with something we're really excited about. So as part of that, I'm pleased to share that Hazel Blears has actually joined the NDA as a social value advisor. So for those of you that don't know who Hazel is an ex-Cabinet Office Minister who actually authored the Social Value Act back in 2012. And she's helping us to look at how we can drive social value and socioeconomic impacts through the work that we do. A couple more things to mention in terms of where we can drive social value through our sort of business as usual activities. Firstly, we have a large portfolio of land. How can we best reuse that for local community benefits? We've got a significant training requirement to do work that needs to be done on site. But the work that we do also allows us to align that potentially with local needs. As I've mentioned before, R&D has potentially multiple applications that we can use for local community benefits. And finally, we are looking at ways that we can add local benefit through moving work off our sites and back into local towns and communities. And when I'm talking about the high security or site critical work, but some of the more back office functions that we can move off the site and provide something back to the local town. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned on the last slide, the grant programme on about £15 million a year, and we try to use it as a catalyst to support our local communities. So ultimately, the grant programme is there to support our local communities, and it's for us to have dialogue with our local communities that helps us understand their local priorities for funding. And we do that through our site stakeholder groups, where we engage with our local communities and continually talking to them and trying to look at projects where we look at the art of the possible, not looking at what we can't do. So in particular, when we're thinking about it from a sort of local perspective, it's really trying to find a balance between driving some of the social benefits that local communities need from being located near to a nuclear station, and also some of the sort of the longer term investments for the future that need to be made, and finding that balance. And as I say, people do need immediate benefits. It can't all be in the future, but we can only find out what local communities want and need through talking to them. Broadly, we try to link our grant funding to big picture outcomes that we want to achieve, but we try to provide flexibility within that framework to again ensure that we're supporting local priorities. Okay, so in terms of how we run the grant programme, we try to run it in a business-like manner as possible. If we could just go back one slide, thank you. That means we robustly review projects and proposals and the governance of funding applications and projects in flight, looking for evidence of spend and how we're measuring outcomes from the project. I mean, ultimately, we're spending the taxpayers' money, so we're always looking at good value for money expenditure from our £15 million a year. To support this, we've actually introduced a new online grants management system last year and revised governance and guidance arrangements. Thanks. Next slide. So to give you some examples of the types of projects to bring to life a little bit of what I'm talking about here. On the left, you've got, if we go back a slide, we've got an example of an infrastructure investment we've made at a port near Dounreay, Scrabster Harbour. So we've supported and co-funded the expansion of these facilities to support their opportunities to diversify into new markets. So trying to expand the harbour to help them diversify the local economy into oil and gas, cruise, offshore wind, which is a huge opportunity up at Dounreay. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have made a number of investments into schools and further education colleges around the country, trying to link up the fact that we need skilled labour and link that into the development of local skills. So the example that you see is a campus up at Whitehaven in Cumbria near Sellafield, where we invested £10 million into creating that community campus. Next slide, please.
Okay, Neil, a couple of minutes is okay?
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up with this slide actually, because I think I'm not going to linger on this for too long, but it highlights the range of things that we do. So economic and social and community investments, where, as I say, we're trying to really support local community growth. My next two slides repeat things I've already said, so I'm just going to wrap up there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Neil, for this explanation. And now we'll have the vision of the local level, so we can complement each other. And for this, there's a small change of the program. And bear with me because I have the presentation open as well, I think, right, from Neil. Okay, and so okay, it's you, Phil, who are sharing the presentation already. Okay,
I'll run it if it's okay, Mary.
Yeah, sure, that's great. So Yeah, there's a small change in the program, so it's not Rob Ward from Copeland, but actually Philip Matthews. We are really happy to have him here as well, because he's also a he's the executive director of Nuleaf, the Nuclear Legacy Advisory Forum, for almost 7 years now, and was a co-director before that for 2 years, was working as consultant. But he's also vice president of GMF and board member of the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. Thanks, Phil. Can you go to settings, because it's not on a slide mode? We see the next slide also. We see the first one and then the next one.
All right, I don't know how to make that change.
If you go to display settings, I think, on the top.
Right.
Can you see your, no,
yeah,
it's my cursor, yeah. And then swap presenter view and slideshow. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Marion. Good morning, everyone, although I think it's actually good afternoon for most of you now. Still good morning in the UK. Yes, as Mary said, Rob from Copeland Council was meant to be giving his presentation, but his wife gave birth to a baby boy 2 weeks early a couple of days ago. So Rob sends his apologies, and I've stepped into the breach. I'm going to say a lot of things that overlap with what Neil said, and I think that's actually because really over the last couple of years there's been a very positive development, I think, in the way the NDA and the nuclear decommissioning sector in the UK has started to really think in a more positive way about socioeconomics. And so Neil said a lot of things about some good developments in the UK, and I'll sort of echo some of that and offer some other points too. So briefly, just to explain my organization, Nuleaf, we're like AMAC in Spain and some other networks. We're a network of municipalities who are concerned with decommissioning and legacy waste management across the UK. This is our guiding objective, and our focus is local government. But I think the important thing is the second part of that objective is that local government is the democratic body representing local people. And what we are trying to do is to deliver the best economic, social, and environmental outcomes for local government, but also for the communities that they serve. So the socioeconomic dimensions of decommissioning are absolutely central to our interest in decommissioning. Another map of the UK's nuclear infrastructure. Just to build on what Neil said, it's a very large and complex nuclear infrastructure we have in the UK. We have Sellafield, the most complicated decommissioning site in Europe and the largest decommissioning site in Europe. We have a lot of Magnox reactors, which are closed now and are being decommissioned by the NDA. We have current nuclear stations operated by EDF, which are going to start closing in the next 2 years or so, and will all be closed within the next 15 years. And unlike some other areas of Europe, we also have a new nuclear program, and that's, again, quite a diverse new nuclear program. So we have one large new nuclear station being built just now, maybe 1 or 2 more will follow, but also the government is very interested in small modular reactors and other projects like a fusion reactor for the UK as well. And it's worth understanding that new nuclear context because a lot of the development opportunities for existing decommissioning sites are related to new nuclear proposals as well. So again, some more context. The UK has had a very long history of involvement in nuclear issues going back to the 1940s. We had the first operational civil nuclear station in the world in the 1950s. And I guess the big challenge for decommissioning on the back of that is that the environmental standards and the management standards for nuclear stations and for waste in the 1940s through to 1970s, even 1980s, were nothing like what we would think as good standards now. And so we have a very large legacy cost for decommissioning, estimated at about £132 billion, 150 billion euros, roughly, that is. And as Neil said, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority is spending about £3 billion a year of largely public money to decommission the existing sites as well. The sector's big, employs around 60,000 jobs, that's the whole nuclear sector, And as I said, we will have more decommissioned stations in the next 15 years or so as well. Neil mentioned the Energy Act. It set up the NDA in 2004, and that requires the NDA to think about socioeconomics. Just very briefly, touch on a few other things. Neil mentioned Social Value Act 2012. That's a requirement to think about social and environmental aspects of procurement. And as Neil said, the NDA has a very large procurement budget. And so the challenge is how that is best used to support local economies and small enterprises across the UK as well. The government launched the nuclear sector deal in 2018, which is looking to capitalize on expertise in decommissioning, create export markets and jobs in that. And as Neil said, the NDA has developed its own local impact, economic and social impact strategy in the last couple of years as well. And as I said, there's a lot going on in that wider nuclear space, new policy, new ways of decommissioning, and proposals for new reactors too. And the Parliament in the UK has challenged the NDA in the last few years on how it's delivering that added value to that very large amount of money that it's spending. And this very much echoes our own challenges as municipalities, which is, you know, how do we see that greater economic, social and environmental value across everything that the NDA does? We recognize that the NDA's decommissioning mission is a very complicated mission in itself. And that should be the primary focus, but there are a lot of opportunities for widening out the benefits from what the NDA is doing. So that's the context. I want to reflect on a few examples and the sort of things that are happening at local level. And going back again to the map of the nuclear infrastructure, and also I think Neil referred to this, I think the issue in the UK is that the individual sites are very different in nature in terms of scale, in terms of future opportunities, in terms of political context, because we have devolved governments in different parts of the UK with different aspirations, and in terms of the scope for different options for redevelopment or new opportunities there. So Sellafield, as I said, huge site, around 10,000 people on the site. Really just at the present time, it's moving towards a site that's totally focused on decommissioning. Reprocessing is coming to an end this year. There's no more power generation on the site, so it is totally a decommissioning site. And I think the thing that's been you know, concentrating the minds of the local authority and other people in Cumbria is that although it's a very long decommissioning mission, it's obvious that the employment in decommissioning will reduce over time. And as Neil said, it's by far the biggest employer in West Cumbria. So what happens next, and how can the area diversify into a new economic future? And so if Rob from Cumbria had been here today to speak, he was going to focus very much on what's called the Cumbria Nuclear Prospectus. So this is something that's been developed by the local authority in partnership with other agencies, and really setting out a vision for the area for the future. There's a huge amount of skills because of the particularly significant challenges of cleaning up some of the facilities at Sellafield. There are a very good concentration of skills and technical expertise in the area. And also we know within the UK, the government has an aspiration for a net zero carbon future by 2050 for the UK economy. A lot of action on renewables, on hydrogen economy, on storage technologies, on decommissioning and on new nuclear as well. So the aspiration of the Cumbria Nuclear Prospectus is to bring all that together. And this is just a sort of a very simple illustration of the sort of vision that the area has. So Sellafield will remain at the heart of that for a very long time. There may be new build nuclear in the area. There'll be offshore renewables, but hopefully the technology base there can spawn a whole range of other innovative technologies around robotics, which are needed for the high hazard facilities at Sellafield. Think about hydrogen economy, think about new nuclear technologies and innovation as well. So really trying to create a virtuous group of complementary technologies and opportunities for the area. On a very different scale, this is the Berkeley site, which is a closed Magnox site. We were pleased to welcome a GMF delegation to an event NDA ran a few years ago at Berkeley, actually in these buildings here. And I think Berkeley's interesting because, yes, it's much, much smaller than Sellafield. The challenges are much less. But one positive thing the NDA has done in recent years is been able to release some of the nuclear site early, and that's led to a rehabilitation of buildings and the creation of a community college that's helping young people to develop nuclear skills, but also skills in other emerging industries as well. And that's seen by the local authority and by others as a real asset to local community. And the last example is one that Neil's mentioned already, which is Scrabster, right up in the far north of Scotland. We have the Dounreay site, 2,000 jobs in that site in an area with a very, very low population. It's by far the biggest employer in this remote part of Scotland. And the different dynamic in Scotland is the Scottish government has a policy that there will be no new nuclear development in Scotland. So the option of a new nuclear site is not there. But as Neil was saying, the NDA, working with the local authority and others, has invested in the harbour. You'll see a cruise ship there. There's a hope to capitalise on that. The water behind in the background is the Pentland Firth, which is the largest marine tidal resource in Europe, possibly the largest marine tidal resource in the world. And there's a lot of activity in marine renewables there, and also offshore wind there. And also the North Sea oil industry is running down, and there's 60–70 billion pounds of decommissioning work required to close and to decommission the nuclear stations in the North Sea as well. So the harbour is going to be a great resource for all of that. And really, just to conclude, some thoughts on where we're at just now. As I said, I think the NDA has moved on a lot under challenge from Parliament and from ourselves in recent years, thinking about social value, thinking about net zero carbon and sustainability, and we have a very good dialogue with them on a lot of that. The COVID recovery is a big challenge for communities, as I'm sure it is across the whole of Europe as well. And I think the other key message is really about local authorities as partners in all this. Local authorities have a huge amount of expertise in economic development, in climate change and sustainability, and they can really help motivate and deliver a lot of this work together with others. The other thing that we feel there's been less movement in the UK on is the principles around community benefits. Renewable industry in the UK pays community benefits for development. We have some community benefits around some areas of what the NDA does, but we don't have a comprehensive package of community benefits, and that's something we're looking to promote over the coming years. And so really, just to conclude, as I said, we have a huge amount of public money being spent over the next century in cleaning up the UK's nuclear legacy. To deliver the maximum benefit, we really need partnership working, and we really need to think in a long-term way, strategic way, and we need to think about economic, social, and environmental principles in terms of what's delivered there. I think there's a lot of opportunities there that can be harnessed, and local authorities are going to be a key partner in delivering a lot of that. So thank you for your time, and I've really enjoyed hearing the other presentations today, and look forward to the next presentation too.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thanks for sharing your slides, for concluding saying that municipalities are key partners, because it's really the municipalities co-organizing this I think very interesting seminar. We see there's quite a lot of participants still with us today.